Hey guys, Max Rich here, and today I want to talk about a question that I get a lot from people. A lot of people contact me, and usually this happens between the beginner stage and like the middle intermediate stage. But a lot of people say, "Hey, I'm getting all kinds of pain in my left hand. I can't play very long. I'm hurting. My wrist is hurting. This is hurting. This is hurting." Like all kinds of interesting things with related to pain from playing guitar. There should not be any pain when you're playing guitar. That's sort of like a red flag. And a lot of times, I would venture to say most of the time, the pain is happening in the left hand or the fretting hand, right? And it's usually happening for one or two very consistent reasons. And I'll show you what those reasons are. Basically, a lot of players, when they play guitar, they're unaware of how they're actually manipulating their arm, their shoulder, their wrist, their hand in order to fret the strings. They just like do whatever they can to get their fingers on the fretboard, and then that's how they play, right? A lot of them, a lot of players, when and I did this, everyone does this when you're starting out, because let's face it, it is a super awkward instrument to play. A lot of players will play like this, right? Where they're pushing their fingers out and this gap in the thumb, right, is actually pushed in front of the fretboard, right? So this area right here is actually pushed in front of the fretboard instead of behind the fretboard, right? So they do that because like they'll play like a C chord, let's say, right? And in order to get the high E string to ring, oh, it's not ringing, it's dead. So that's dead. So I start pushing my hand out. Oh, and what do you know? Now I get it. So they start pushing their wrist out this way, and they're like, oh, well, that's how I can get the strings underneath to ring clearly, so this must be how I play guitar. And then they go about playing guitar this way, and then after a while they start getting all kinds of wrist pain, right? Or forearm pain, or some hand pain, right? And the reason for that is the angle of your wrist, I could play this C chord. Look at the angle of my wrist. It is not the angle I was just showing you. The gap between my first finger and thumb is way back here behind the neck, right? The angle I was showing you, the angle that you probably play with if you're having pain, is out like this. Now look at the angle of my wrist, right? This is like a 90-degree angle in my wrist, right? If you know anything about anatomy, especially the anatomy of your hands and your arms, all the tendons that come out of the muscles in your forearm, right? They go through a tunnel in your wrist. It's called the carpal tunnel, right? And when you bend this, you're essentially pinching those tendons, right? And you're creating like a hinge point against those tendons, right? And it would be like if you were to like stretch a rubber band, and then someone pushed their finger down in the center of the rubber band. Everything would contract, and it would get even tighter than it was when it was fully outstretched, right? And so like to test this, just hold your hand up. Hold your left hand up and with a straight wrist vertically, and just wiggle your fingers. Try every little strange finger combination you can, backwards, forwards, down, up, every little pattern, right? And now bend your wrist at 90 degrees and do it. Like, I mean, I can barely do it. Like, it's really, really awkward. And it makes perfect sense. Why? Because when you bend your wrist like this, you're pinching off all the tendons that control your fingers at the wrist. So you essentially like immobilize your hand. And then you're trying to power through that and fight through that and override that hinge point by playing stuff and doing all kinds of stuff. You're going to necessarily get injuries. A lot of people get tendinitis, which is inflammation of the tendons somewhere that happens. And it's a really, really, really bad thing to do. Do not do this, right? There is virtually nothing I play that requires me to do this unless it's some like humongous stretch where I'm stretching over like a ton of frets. But that hardly ever happens. Like 99.9% of the time I'm playing like this, maybe a little bit of a wrist bend, right? Maybe a little bit. But hardly ever. Almost never am I playing like this, right? This makes no sense to play this way, so please stop playing this way. And you could tell when people play this way by one simple thing, I mean, other than obviously the wrist, look where my thumb is on the back of the neck, right? My thumb is way down here. If I were to play something, my thumb would be up here, not here, because look at the angle of my wrist, and then when I bring my thumb up, look at the angle of my wrist now. It's completely straight. Those tendons are free and clear to move at will, right? Down here, they're pinched. Up here, they're free, right? And it doesn't mean that I have to play everything, like Jimi Hendrix style with my thumb over the top. What it does mean, though, is that the higher I bring my thumb, I mean, just look at my wrist. You can see like the bracelet that I have on, right? You can see it there, and then as I bring my wrist up, you can see the angle change in my wrist, right? It almost even like pronates upward like that, right? Which is not the end of the world. It's not a bad thing, right? It's better than this. Everything is better than this. This is definitely, stop doing that. But the other thing is that when you have your fingers out like this, or your wrist out like this, look at the angle of my fingers. They're going backwards towards the headstock, right? Which makes everything extremely awkward to play, right? It's a very sort of like inefficient position to play in. When I bring my thumb up, now look at, well, my wrist is great for one, but now look at the angle of my fingers. They're moving towards the guitar, right? Everything is moving towards the center of the guitar. When I slide, when I move, I can do it without a lot of work. Whereas if I'm like this, it's incredibly awkward. You have not a lot of mobility when your fingers are facing the wrong way, right? Watch any great guitar player, right? Whether it's Andre Segovia or Slash or Brian May, it doesn't matter who it is. Their fingers are like this. Their fingers are going this way. Sometimes they'll go a little more vertically, but they'll never go that way, right? And they just won't because it's not efficient, right? But that is an absolute consequence of sticking your wrist way out. So whatever you do, if you're having pain, if you're having an issue with, like your left hand hurts, and I'm not talking about like, here because of my bar chord hurts or something like that, right? That's a different thing. The first thing you should do is check the angle of your wrist. Is it straight or is it bent way out like that? If it's straight, then you're probably good and this probably isn't the cause of your pain. But you've got to make sure that it's really straight all the time, because you could be playing something like this and be really into the music and really into playing and then be like, oh yeah, let me check my wrist, and then subconsciously you straighten your wrist, you look at it and you're like, oh, it's straight, right? So maybe the best thing is to film yourself for 10, 20 minutes and then really watch the tape back and see what your wrist is doing, because it's different when you're observing yourself. When you're looking for a problem, you tend to auto-correct that problem, right? So you kind of want to catch yourself in the moment, in the act, so that you get a real-life assessment of whether or not you're actually doing this, right? The other problem that a lot of players have is that they keep their thumb in one of the worst places possible. They keep their thumb either behind their first finger or back over here, and then they play like this, right? Now, if I play like this, right, number one, I lose a ton of mobility, right? Because, like, just think about this. Hold your hand like this, with your thumb in the center, wiggle your fingers, it's all nice and good. Now hold your thumb way out here and wiggle your fingers. You have less control, you have less dexterity, you have less mobility because of the way the muscles and the tendons in your forearm are structured, right? So that's number one. Number two is that the thumb is essentially the balancing act in your hand. It's like, those tightrope walkers that hold the stick, as they cross over the tightrope over like a canyon or something like that. They use that stick to balance it. If they're not holding that long stick in the center, if they're holding it like all the way to the side, the weight of that stick is just going to take them over and pull them down, right? They've got to be completely balanced. Your thumb is the exact same way. If I'm playing, regardless of how many frets I'm stretching over, if I'm stretching over 3, my thumb is in the middle of my hand, even closer to my ring finger, closer to the body of the guitar, almost always, than it is to the first finger. If I'm playing over 4 frets or 5 frets or 6 frets, my thumb is always in the center, because that allows an equal distribution of weight between my fingers. If you're too hard on this side, right, and now you're trying to, I see this all the time. I mean, I can barely do it. I can't reach 5 frets comfortably. I mean, I just can't if my thumb is back here. If I bring my thumb here, now I can reach what, 6, 7 frets even, you know? At least 5 or 6, right? And the farther my thumb goes this way, the farther I can reach, right? But the farther back this way, the more it's pulling my hand towards the headstock and making it way harder to play with my pinky. I see this all the time when players try to play pentatonic scales. They'll play like this, and then I'll say, oh, use your pinky, and they're like, I can't, right? And it's because the thumb is back here, or it's back here on the side like this, right? Either way, it's not in the center, right? Which is not ideal. You want your thumb in the center so that you can use your pinky just as efficiently as you can use your first finger, right? So those two elements, the wrist, the bad wrist bend, right? And the thumb being in the wrong spot, being too far towards the headstock, both of those are major culprits for pain. So if you're having pain, check to make sure. I can guarantee that one of those is happening, if not both. So it's very common that both happen because they both sort of feed off of each other. So get rid of the wrist bend, straighten that wrist by bringing the thumb up, right? And then move the thumb in the center, and you'll have a way more balanced hand. The pressure in your pinky will be much closer to the pressure in your first finger. You'll have way more balanced playing, and you'll have more dexterity and finger independence. So I hope that helps. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps me continue to do this. And if you feel like throwing a donation my way, that would be much appreciated. You can find that out on my website, www.maxrichmusic.com. And if you have any questions, if you have any issues, if you have pain that isn't addressed by these two things, please send me a private message. I answer all my messages. My DMs are always open. So please hit me up and let me know what the issue is, and I'll do my best to help you solve it. So I'll see you next time.